This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet and Nick Martin. I thank you both so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I am joined by Joshua Cutchin.
Hello.
Wren Collier.
Hey, everyone.
And Cherylee Black.
Hi there.
And first, before we go anywhere, I want to kind of comment on our ETH show, which was received fairly well for the most part. But I do want to clarify a couple of things that people had commented about. One, although we're saying there are alternatives to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, we're not saying that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is not a possibility. But since we don't know what any of it is, it's hard to lay on one thing, and people just assume that it's extraterrestrial, and I don't know if that's the best way to dig through this stuff. And Josh, I know you have sort of a mixed feeling on that as well, is that some of it could be extraterrestrial.
I mean, yeah, I actually wouldn't have named that particular episode the failure of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I probably would have said something like the shortcomings of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Again, it's less about the idea that it's an insufficient explanation and more about trying to draw attention to other explanations that people might not be aware of or that people have dismissed outright because it's not the explanation du jour in terms of what's going on with our culture, and that's really where I come from.
And to me, I feel like there's not a lot of it has been culturally created and based on assumption rather than evidence. And if you look at the evidence through a certain perspective, that's what you're going to come to. But if you look at it as a whole, it's not so clear cut. Also, someone said something about me not believing Bob Lazar. I think Bob Lazar is legit as far as like what he believes. I just think he was being used.
I think it's a definite possibility. I also think that there's also a possibility that it is exactly what he says it is. I mean, I think on the latest Joe Rogan podcast, he talks about there being 9 recovered craft. Yeah, maybe there have been 9 aliens who have visited Earth. But to me, structured craft does not always line up. And I think I sort of intimated this on our last show. But to me, the structured craft, lights in the sky, crash retrieval, does not have as strong a correlation with the contact experience as people would like to think.
Yeah. But we are not going to talk ETH today.
Don't get me started.
What we are going to talk about is psi, and that is psychic abilities of various kinds. And Josh, one of the things that seems to bug you is when people dismiss psi, but they'll accept all these other type of paranormal type of stuff as fact while throwing psi out. And I know our friend Rosian is kind of like that. If I'm remembering right, I don't think Rosian believes that there's much to psi, but he's willing to consider a lot of other things. And I apologize to Rosian if I was wrong on that.
Yeah, well, we all know Rosian's a jerk, so it's fine. No, for me, psi is the one hill that I will die upon, because if psi is real, then materialism is broken. And it has by far, in terms of the current scientific parameters for acceptance in the scientific establishment, it by far, of any esoteric topic, has the most support behind its reality. The thing that I like to point to is as sort of really dismantling any arguments against the existence of psi is the work of Dean Radin, who has actually achieved a level of, I believe it's less than 5 sigma with some of his double slit experiments. And in case anybody is wondering what that is, 6 sigma is sort of the industry standard for 99.99966% of all opportunities to produce some sort of feature that are to be free of defects in engineering. And that's sort of the gold standard is 6 sigma. It used to be 7 sigma, it's 6 sigma. Dean Radin's experiment with a double slit and experienced meditators yielded a result of less than 5 sigma that practiced meditators could influence the appearance of a double slit experiment. So that sort of rules out statistical chance and is, I think, one of the best bits of data that we have. And that doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have Pim von Lommel publishing in the Lancet Journal, which of course is the gold standard for medical research. That was in 2001 about near-death experiences and heart attacks. Daryl Bim, Cornell University professor, had a 2010 paper talking about presentiment, which some people have tried to poke some holes in that. I'm willing to entertain some of that, but he also got 6 sigma on his meta-analysis of his precognition experiments as well. Rupert Sheldrake is a little bit more controversial. I think you can find a little bit more errors in Sheldrake's work.
Really?
But yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to because the experiments that he sets up are not quite in that laboratory controlled setting like they are with BIM and with Dean Radin. And we can talk about that later if we want to. Since Cherylee knows everybody in Seriah, I would doubt if she's had some sort of interaction with Rupert Sheldrake. Have you, Cherylee?
We've emailed back and forth a bit. That's
okay, yeah. So more than me, more than some sort of little neophyte like me. But I think that he's on the right track with some stuff. I mean, I'm very fond of citing something that Gordon White once said, which is that if you had sufficiently sensitive equipment, you could measure the effects of the tides in your kitchen sink, but that's not where you measure the effects of tides. You measure it in the field. You could measure, you could try to measure the efficacy of a linebacker in a laboratory, but that's not where you measure it. You measure it in a football game. So I think that's one of the things that's really missing with a lot of the way that people observe all anomalies is that they are trying to put things into a lab that don't belong there. And I think that Sheldrake is trying to, a lot of his work tends to observe stuff outside the lab, and that's always going to be open to attacks by people who have a vested interest in disproving the reality of psi. But again, I stand by the fact this is the hill that I will die upon, because not only does it have the best body of research behind it. I think it was John Alexander who said that there was more evidence for the reality of psi than there was for either ibuprofen or acetaminophen. I can't remember. I can't ever keep the two separate. But there's actually a giant body of work and proving the fact that psi and the predictive ability of psi exists beyond chance, and that's all it has to do. It has to be beyond random chance.
It's actually aspirin.
Oh, is that
so
it?
Aspirin specifically, was that the quote? Of course you'd know that. Of course you'd know that. Why am I even talking? But really, for me, this is the linchpin, because if this is real, then if psi is real, then materialism falls apart, and we can get into that later if you want to, because I go back and forth on Twitter all day about how psi affects falsify materialism, the materialist paradigm. But if psi is real, then materialism is falsified, which means that everything that we talk about, Bigfoot, interdimensionality, UFOs, time travel, whatever your bailiwick is, all that's back on the table.
All right. Either of you want to follow that up?
I mean, I would just say, if it's real isn't even really a question at this point, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it absolutely is real. And it's just, like Josh said, there are vested elements in trying to either suppress that or change the narrative around that. You can get as conspiratorial about that as you want. I don't quite know why, other than the idea that maybe living in a world full of psychics and reality warpers is a little hairy prospect for capitalist society. But yeah, I mean, it definitely is real, and there's a huge body of evidence pointing towards its actual effects. And people like me and other people who engage with the phenomenon. I mean, Cherylee, kind of does it in a lab setting. I do it in a ritual kind of magician way. But the idea is for people like us, where can we take it? How can we apply it to practical situations? What we know it's real, so what's the praxis?
Right. Cherylee?
Oh, it's sort of strange because right now I'm doing some experimental work with a scientist who's a very mainstream scientist, and I'm not going to use his name because I don't know if he's outed himself yet.
Bill Nye, the science guy.
No, it's not a Bill Nye. Actually, Bill Nye is not that well qualified. This person has quite a number of published articles in Nature.
Yeah, no, Bill Nye is a hack.
Yeah.
Please at me on this. Please at me. Bill Nye is a hack.
No,
and that's also demonstratable. I mean, he's never written a paper. He's not a high-level scientist. He's just charismatic and a good comedian.
He's an actor.
Yeah.
With some military-industrial complex ties to it as well. Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, don't worry. No, I'm not working with a Bill Nye. I'm working with somebody with very good credentials and who's very well published. But it's kind of strange because, I mean, in the past when I went to university, it was a very materialistic environment where everybody assumed that kind of philosophy of life. Well, they didn't really assume; they just didn't know there was any other options. Like, everything just is done from that point of view without question, without even understanding, what materialism is. And so when you start working with people who are actually looking at it from a different point of view, and whether it's idealism or panpsychism, anything, or they're just not quite sure, what the correct philosophical point of view should be, but they're willing to go outside of materialism because they think materialism doesn't really answer the questions they want to look at. And you start to forget that there are people that actually look at things from a materialistic viewpoint after a while, because you think, God, that's just so done with. Like, that doesn't work.
I think, and again, I think I quote Gordon probably too much, but Gordon White once said it was like the equivalent of that guest who like sleeps over after your party and like is sticking around for lunch, and it's like, just leave, please, just leave.
Yeah, well, that's it's just it's strange to think, oh yeah, there's still materialists, and I mean, and of course they're in the majority, but when you get away from that and you can actually just do science without having to worry about them, it's really fun.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it gives you just this freedom to think of things in different ways and try different things, and it's great.
And when we talk psi, we're talking about precognition, we're talking about telepathy, we're talking about wow, I can't remember the word for it when you're moving things with your mind, influencing
telekinesis.
Telekinesis, thank you.
Psychokinesis.
Psychokinesis. Yeah. Oh yeah. Remote viewing too. That doesn't fall into one of those categories.
Also magic. Just in general.
And I think a lot of people don't make that connection, but magic is basically focusing yourself so you can do this type of stuff.
Right, which is again how I got into this like Twitter flame war with people who were like all about the reality of UFOs and were posting children's books about witches on my timeline, being like, "Is this more of your speed, bro?" I'm like, no, this is not. Like, let's look at some peer-reviewed journals. That's more of my speed. But yeah, magical practice falls into that. And the one thing that's sticky about magical practice is that it's still unfalsifiable that spirits exist outside of the self.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in a purely scientific sense, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm on the side of them existing outside of the self. But yeah, it's that's the one sticky thing, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, and that also too just takes interaction with them. When you interact with them, you realize fairly quickly that they have agency, that they're intelligent, things that are not just in your head. Some stuff I guess is just in your head, but for the most part, the entities that people interact with, I don't think are just figments of their imagination or archetypes or whatever you want to call it. A lot of times these are things that exist without physical bodies that have intelligence, that have desires, their own thoughts, and again, once you start kind of interacting with them, you figure that out. But if someone's never had those interactions, it's kind of hard to even explain what that's like to them.
And no, I personally completely get that. I did a mock-up of a Venn diagram probably about a year ago that had like two completely non-conjoined circles, and one that said debunkers, and the other one said people who've actually spent time in a haunted house. Because I think that if you do that sort of thing enough, there does come barring another Gordonism, there does come a moment where you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. I had that happen to me back in probably 2009-ish, but I think that sort of ties into the reality of these things, is that you can't intellectualize your way into accepting the fact that there are discarnate entities with their own agency. You have to experience it for yourself. No one can tell you what the Matrix is. You have to experience it.
That's actually a pretty apt analogy. I mean, once you've seen it, you can't really forget. And I mean, I think that's why people who have, people who have near-death experiences and people who, see a UFO or whatever, that's why they develop some of these abilities or psi abilities. Not necessarily as a byproduct of it, but I think it's just a general opening up of the possibility of the world, I was gonna say, I think that's why I used to be terrified of talking about it. One of the big things was because I had a lot of different types of experiences that were all anomalous, and I thought, oh Lord, if I just had one, maybe I could talk about it. But clearly, if I'm having a bunch of them, I must be mentally ill, because you couldn't have a bunch of them. But that's not really how it works. People, once you have one, it's like it opens you up to other things, and your experiences tend to get more. There's more depth to them. They just become bigger somehow, and it's not like you just have one and then you can forget it. Yeah.
And what really amazes me, though, is you'll see people who look at, say, Hal Puthoff's work, and they'll go, okay, he's with TTSA, and what he does as far as UFOs and engineering, that's great. But let's just forget about that remote viewing stuff that he had published in Nature.
Yeah.
No, we can't do that, or IEEE, big name journals, really important journals, and that was remote viewing, and they'll just invoke Uri Geller and say, well, okay, we can forget about it now.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Seriah.
Oh, I was going to say, and Uri Geller has some pretty impressive lab work as well. I mean, not dealing with his entertainment aspect of it. I mean, he's been tested pretty thoroughly and pulled up some pretty impressive results, and has a UFO experience in his history as well.
Yeah, but there's some other stuff going on with Geller too, though, because didn't he have sort of like a handler that was possibly connected to the CIA as well?
I don't know.
There was some sort of back scene stuff going on with Uri Geller that it's always. I genuinely think that Uri Geller has psi abilities. I just also think that he may have been part of something, not necessarily disinfo, but you know what I mean, something kind of spooky also going on.
Well, and it's also that great shirt that is available from Greg Bishop's Radio Mysteriosa, which has a picture of, I think it's a UFO and Bigfoot and like a brain or something. It says repeatable but not on demand, which is the way that this just sort of summarizes your old argument, Seriah, that even though you can fake a punch, it doesn't mean all punches are fake.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and the thing is that the work that was done at SRI, even if you take Uri Geller's contribution to it away from it, those there's still significant work there. It doesn't need as. And the other thing was, actually, if you watch that Third Eye Spies, I don't know if you've seen that documentary. It's really good.
No.
But one of the things they mentioned was that they decided not to work with Geller anymore because of his connections to foreign governments.
Well, he's Israeli, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, Uri Geller had something going on that we're still not even really sure about.
So he couldn't pass the security classification to work at SRI.
Yeah.
That was mentioned in the documentary.
It is funny how where's that documentary available, by the way?
It's on Amazon, isn't it?
It's not Amazon for free. It's still on demand.
No, you have to rent it. You have to rent it. But it's well worth the watch.
Okay. And that's Third Eye Spies?
Yeah,
Third Eye Spies. It's by the same guy who directed Six String Samurai, oddly enough.
No, I haven't seen that either.
Which I hear is, I hear that Third Eye Spies is great, and I have a feeling that it sits in the, we're talking about this off air, but I feel like it sits in the really good paranormal documentary category as opposed to the sort of hackneyed, bludgeoning you with old facts in new packaging subset.
Actually, yeah, it was really good because it gave a lot of, like, I knew quite a bit about Russell Targ's life, and I mean, I've read a couple of his books, and so I was familiar. I've read all the papers that were published on that work, but there was a lot of new information and he went and found people that have never really given interviews before. So and his idea was, he needs to talk to these people while they're still around because, they're all getting on in age now. So it was very good, and there was a lot of new stuff in it.
Yeah, and it's something that I find really interesting because, and there are going to be a lot of people who would disagree with me, and this is probably in terms of my love of the solidity with which Psi has been presented over the years. This is pretty shaky ground, but the reality of remote viewing, I think, is, in my mind, has a lot of strength behind it. And yet, if you would bring up that topic to the people on the street, they would sort of still think it's woo without any sort of real support behind it. And that's a thought that I had is, when framed within the context of this current, apparently we're in the throes of disclosure. Nobody told me I didn't get that invite, but I wonder if the government, if there even are really genuinely compelling documents that come out, which I think that there's some that are on the way out. I think there's some, but and even if you have former government experts saying this is a reality, what's the real impact of the person on the street? Are they really going to say, oh, well, this person who was admiral said this, and this person who was. I wonder what the impact of that in terms of the person on the street believing that UFOs are a reality is really going to have. I mean, Edgar Mitchell has talked about UFOs forever, and he kind of has he has pretty good credentials behind him, and people just sort of shrug off his testimony as well. So I sort of wonder, with something that's as solid as a lot of the Psi research that people still dismiss as being the talk of the new age, how would people react to similar support regarding something like UFOs? That was a rambly thing, but I hope my meaning came across.
Mostly.
Awesome. Okay. I guess my thing is that I don't.
Are you sort of trying to say that, like, is it possible for the U.S. public to ever accept any of this stuff, given the 50 years of perception management that's been done on the topic.
And also, like, 70 years of people coming out saying, I was stationed at XYZ base, and this is what we did, and this is what happened. And people are like, yeah, maybe you're BSing us. And they sort of move on with their lives. Mm-hmm. That's a much more succinct way of putting it than my rambling bit. Yeah.
I mean, I talked with Dave Metcalf about this a little bit when I was at Paramania, and I think I came to the impression that at least within some aspect of the government, there has been, this is very X-Files-y, but that there was a definite effort to make people think for some reason that psi didn't exist. And it's odd that in the last, I guess, 2-3 years, there's almost the reverse effort going on. Like, now we're trying to convince people that psi does exist, or you know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like what is the game that's being played behind the scenes? Because it's like, for years you told us this stuff didn't exist, and now there's all this stuff coming out about how it is a reality, and people like us have known that it was all real all along. But it's kind of like the TTSA thing. Like, it almost feels like someone trying to spin a narrative.
Well, yeah. and I feel like the TTSA thing is driving a deliberate wedge between people who realize that there's a metaphysical aspect to the UFO experience, or the contact experience at least, mm-hmm. and people who think that it's purely technological.
Yeah.
Cherylee, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. And, as much, I was never terribly interested in UFOs, mostly because there is that kind of, it's all nuts and bolts attitude. Right. Which, and yet, when I've read work, by Valet, and clearly there's a lot in common with what happened, what that experience does to you, as, in terms of opening you up, and near-death experiences, or after-death communications. All of those things affect you in a certain way, and they're all very similar. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that new Jacques Vallée film that's supposed to be coming out in the fall in English.
Yeah,
it is coming out in English. Okay, good.
It is, yeah. It is coming out in English, and like just from what I've seen in the previews, it really kind of tackles that whole thing. That yes, there are physical effects, but there are also spiritual effects, and you can't take those away from the experience. Like, you just can't, and you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And yet there are people who says, no, it's nuts and bolts craft. It's it's not the Russians, it's aliens.
and I've heard from some people that I respect that, there's this sort of narrative amongst the TTSA crowd that the old guard is a bunch of fuddy-duddies and set in their ways. But I hear the things that the old guard are saying from some friends of mine about this is more related than it seems, I promise. About like the sort of like the freaking Tic Tac video, and they're saying that's interesting, that's great, that's part of this, but that's not the most interesting aspect of this. There are people who are more interested in the metaphysics of this, who say that's the end game of all this. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily dismissive of this, because I think a rising tide lifts all ships. But in regards to the Valet documentary, that's all about sort of metaphysical implications. And I think that's the real core of the phenomena. I don't think the core of the phenomena is seeing, ships zipping around off the bridge of ships, aircraft, anomalous aircraft in the sky. I think it's more about the individual experience. And I might have completely interrupted you, Shirley, so I'm sorry if I did.
No, you didn't. And I mean, what you just brought up kind of reminded me of how There was a talk from was it McMinimus UFO Festival, where George Knapp and Jeremy Lazar had interviewed Commander Fravor, and he made some very unflattering comments about other witnesses to the whole event. Basically invoking mental illness, and which, and I kind of wonder if that was, it's like he was there, like, yeah, I'm here, I'm the only one whose opinion counts, because I saw kind of a nuts and bolts thing and a high technology thing, and that's where it ends. And, and these other people having experiences, well, they're just making things up.
Even though as intimated, this is a detail I wasn't quite aware of, as intimated in the Joe Rogan Lazar Corbell interview that just dropped. Apparently, said Tic Tac showed up instantaneously 60 miles away at the position that Fravor was supposed to appear at next.
Yeah, that I knew, because it was like it was psychic. It kind of knew where to be.
But it's not. But it's not psychic. And if it is psychic, then it just totally fits in with the idea that matter is still fundamental, which drives me up a freaking wall. So, soapbox. I will go back and forth with people about whether or not telepathy breaks materialism. This is not my opinion. Mario Bunge, respected science philosopher, says that telepathy and precognition are incompatible with the epistemological principle according to which the gaining of factual knowledge requires sense perception at some point. Philosopher H. Price, the implications of telepathy are incompatible with the materialistic conception of human personality. John Keeks, professor emeritus of philosophy at the University of Albany, telepathy presents a challenge both to dualism and materialism. And as I'm sure you're aware, Cherylee, Jeff Kripal has talked about how telepathy is basically contradictory to materialism in a genuine way. What people don't realize is they think that I say, or someone says, telepathy breaks materialism, sci-FX breaks materialism, and they think that means that we have to throw out everything that we've learned scientifically. It doesn't, really. The analogy that I like to employ is, say you add green, just one color, green, to a black and white film. It doesn't take away black, it doesn't take away white, but it's no longer a black and white film, right? It's a black and white and green film. And so I think that's the thing that people get really, stumble over, is that they want to continue trying to fit or shove materialism and psi phenomena, telepathy and psi phenomena into the materialist paradigm, and that just doesn't work. And I talk about these quotes ad nauseum with people, and they're like, well, I don't think that's the case. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if you don't think it's the case. That's just from a philosophical standpoint. That's literally what this means, is that there's something beyond base matter that influences and sort of directs our reality. And that drives me up a freaking wall that people can't separate their own beliefs in terms of reconciling a lot of the great scientific advancements that we've made with the fact that this says that consciousness has a role to play in what we know as reality.
I think consciousness is probably the prime mover of reality, but that's something we can't prove yet.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that's a more realistic philosophy at this point, in light of the data.
And I think eventually the data will probably start moving that way. If it's correct, science will eventually course correct.
I personally thought this. I thought that ufology was moving away from the nuts and bolts thing, but then we just need a little bit of a breadcrumb trail to talking about, recovered spacecraft and extraterrestrials, and then the entire field completely pivots in the other direction, where the people who are talking about metaphysics are now the crazy woo ones. So I think that it's going to be susceptible to influence more so than we'd like, and I think that really is sort of the challenge that we're facing, is that I mean, I think that power structures have a lot more to lose from a revelation that consciousness is fundamental, that there is sort of a metaphysical reality at play, than they have to admitting that there are little green men, little green scientists visiting us from Zeta Reticuli. That's my own 2 cents.
Okay. The other problem, let me see if I can pull this article up here. I wanted to talk about it at some point. Yeah, it's from the New Yorker, and it's entitled "Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds." And it says, in 1975, researchers at Stanford invited a group of undergraduates to take part in a study about suicide. They were presented with pairs of suicide notes. In each pair, one note had been composed by a random individual, the other by the person who had subsequently taken his own life. The students were then asked to distinguish between the genuine notes and the fake ones. Some students discovered that they had a genius for the task. Out of 25 pairs of notes, they correctly identified the real one 24 times. Others discovered that they were hopeless. They identified the real note in only 10 instances. As is often the case with psychological studies, the whole setup was a put-on. Though half the notes were indeed genuine, they'd been obtained from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. The scores were fictitious. The students who had been told they were always right on average were no more discerning than the ones that had been told they were mostly wrong. In the second phase of the study, the deception was revealed. The students who were told the real point of the experiment was to gauge their responses to thinking they were right or wrong. This, it turned out, was also a deception. Finally, the students were asked to estimate how many suicide notes they had actually categorized correctly and how many thought an average student would get right. At this point, something curious happened. The students in the high score group said that they thought they had, in fact, done quite well, significantly better than the average student, even though, as they'd just been told, they had zero grounds for believing this. Conversely, those who'd been assigned the low-score group said they thought they had done significantly worse than the average student, a conclusion that was equally unfounded. And I think that's a study that you can see in real life, in culture, every day. Once people believe something, it's very hard to show them facts that are contrary to that. This is a really long article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you.
Yeah, basically, we all confirm our own biases.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a part of human behavior. So it's hard to stop and step outside of that and say, okay, what's my assumption, what's my belief, and what do the facts actually say? And a lot of people want certain things to be true. That's the other thing. So, it's a matter of some people want extraterrestrials to be here, or they want ghosts to be proof of the afterlife. And that's the only way they want to look at it. And whenever something supports that, they're like, look, facts, evidence, and I'm right.
Or the opposite. I mean, so this will be I'll try to step back because I know I've been sort of monopolizing the microphone here, but there was somebody on Twitter who said, I think the Men in Black phenomenon is real, but I think that they're government agents who are trying to suppress UFO witnesses. And I was hard-pressed in looking at that comment to think of more than, 10, maybe that's generous, 10 instances of Men in Black visitations that don't have something really, really strange about them. And I think that's, again, a sort of confirmation bias thing where it's like, well, I'm convinced that these are extraterrestrials coming down in nuts and bolts craft. And I think that the government's suppressing it, so Men in Black must be government agents. And that's the sort of thing that you see I think that there's I think the confirmation bias on every single side of the spectrum is one of the biggest hurdles to jump over. And
yes.
That's my sort of 2 cents.
It's belief. It's emotional to a lot of people. Yeah, I was just flipping through this to see if there's
somebody else say something. Somebody else say something, so I'm not accused of dominating the conversation.
Well, so I mean, when we're talking about this stuff, part of the problem is, like I said, it's a matter of getting people to understand what's belief and what's fact. People, like I said, there were a couple people for the ETH show that we did who were like, look, extraterrestrials are here. That's a fact. And, what's that based on? It's based on belief. It's based on what they want to believe or what they think they've seen evidence of. But evidence and facts are not that simple to come by, especially in these fields. And one of the strongest things you do get in these fields is statistics. When you do size studies and you get really huge hits off statistics, and that's the easiest thing for people to throw out because they don't really understand the significance of it.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, people will say that you can make statistics lie, which up to a point is true,
Yeah.
But still, there's something to be said for good scientific methodology, but people don't really pay much attention to it. And part of that is just like every week there's a study on what foods we should eat to make us thin or healthier or, live longer or cure us from diseases. And then, wait long enough and it'll be a different food. And there's, like they'll just change it. And so people kind of think, well, why can't they get this right? and that's definitely a problem. And sometimes, there's something called the experimenter effect. And in science, even with a well-designed study, you could often confirm your own beliefs, and actually this works really, really well in sci experiments. There was some done where they had two sets of Gansfield studies. One was done by a scientist who believed that there could be a positive outcome in the test, and she got positive outcomes. Then there was one that was done by a hardcore skeptic. He got negative outcomes. and yet they did identical protocols. Like they did this as a joint experiment to see, and their biases were confirmed in their results.
And that's not surprising.
No, it's not.
And there's also, there's people, they're the type of debunkers too, who, like Randy, who would go out and debunk, Uri Geller, or who was going after, or better yet, when he went after, who'd you mention earlier? Josh, did the dog experiments. Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah,
oh,
sure.
yeah.
And, he posted in a journal that, he replicated Sheldrake's work and found no correlation, and the dog simply didn't know anything. And when Sheldrake pushed to get his documentation on it, eventually it came out that he never actually did the test. He watched a friend's dog once and didn't see any correlation, so that was enough for him.
Well, actually, he did a couple of tests, and
did he?
And when you actually look at the data that he actually got the same results that Sheldrake did.
Really?
Yeah, he just ignored it, and he changed, and he looked at it, and then he said, "Well, I have to calculate this differently."
Huh.
And I think he only did like 4 tests versus like 100 or something by Sheldrake. So yeah, I mean Sheldrake did a large, a large study, and the other fellow did not.
Right, yeah. Randy did not.
Oh no, sorry, it wasn't Randy. It was actually, I think it was Richard Wiseman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he wrote a book about it, and basically didn't even mention all of Sheldrake's work in it. Just that he debunked it. It was like, yay, I debunked him. But when you actually look closely, well, no, you didn't. He's just saying he did.
Okay, because the story I heard about Randy is that Randy literally watched a friend's dog once for a little bit and didn't see any response. So, but he had presented it to the magazine in the article as if he had done the same experiments that Sheldrake did. He was just so convinced that Sheldrake's work was wrong, he had no problem just lying about it.
Oh, okay. Actually, yeah, he's actually done that on a couple different occasions. So, yeah, I know he was not known for his honesty.
Yeah. But yet people who think they want the truth will hold him up as, oh, look, he's the one who's doing the real work. And it's like, no, he's just debunking badly.
Yeah.
And again, that comes down to a belief. He's saying what they want to hear. So he's the good guy.
Well, and he actually, even though he hasn't done any work to show he's right, he truly believes he's right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so he thinks he's doing a good thing, and
Yes.
telling people,
Yeah.
you know, telling people that you know, not to be stupid. You know?
And that was the issue with Bud Hopkins too, because at a certain point his wife, realized that he was sort of adjusting the things people were seeing in these, in hypnosis sessions so they'd match up better. And she was not okay with that. And he said, look, we know this is what's happening. And if we want to convince people, we got to give them more convincing evidence, because Bud was not doing it to deceive people. He was doing it because he believed he had the answer, and he just wanted to make the answer look more convincing.
Yeah, I think that surety is the enemy to a lot of anomalies, and people will, people will call me out because they'll say that I'm being sure about being unsure, or I've gotten a lot of different feedback. But it's one thing to say that you think someone's on to the right track, and it's another thing to say that you think that they've figured it all out. And I think that's something that, in any aspect of life, honestly, I think the world would be better if people didn't think that way. In terms of politics, and in terms of, honestly, even as a practicing Christian, in terms of religion. But especially in terms of something that is as relatively unimportant as anomalies, because I think what really matters is how we treat each other. And whenever I see somebody talking about how something is proven or isn't proven, maybe it's the contrarian in me, but it just really, really irritates me a lot.
And I want to thank everyone who has become a Patreon and helped support this show. It means the world to me. And I particularly want to give a shout out to those pledging $10 or more: UFO Weekly News, Maria, John Rutledge Foster III, Kevin, Roger Gonzalez, William Lovelace, 36 Dingo, Jennifer Campbell, Nate Seriah, Mark Brady, Paul Buscini, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Lindsay Jackson K, Edu Kamahort, Chris Isa Hot Dog Samich, Jose A, Janet Runyon, Sean Cosgrove, Ben Crow, American Rambler, Andy McNamara, Patricia Gaia-Quinta, Eric Citron, Matthias Sunby, John Eddy, Riker and Stark, and Mike McGuire. Thank you all very, very much. Let's go through all of you here. What do you think the best evidence for psi is?
Can I go first?
Yes.
Okay, I would think the Gansfield studies, very, very well done. And that was something where they actually had skeptics help to develop the protocols.
Can you tell us more about it?
Okay, well, with the Gansfield, trying to remember, it's been a while since I read up on this, but he basically put somebody kind of into a nice, comfortable place where they've got sort of ping pong balls over their eyes, like cut in half, so that you can't really see anything. You're just kind of seeing this red glow, and you get into an altered state of consciousness. And the idea is that somebody in a distant place is sending you images, and you just kind of, it's almost like remote viewing, except that they kind of came up with a protocol where they would put you into this meditative state, and you would talk about what images were coming to you. And then the way the protocol goes is they have like a pool of pictures, and one is randomly chosen, and you're supposed to guess what you're supposed to look at them and judge which one made sense from what you were saying. And they also have separate judging to go through and look at what was, the best match for the picture. And they found that statistically, people get the correct picture more often than they should. And there's actually a fairly large body of work on this, and meta-analysis has been done on these things, and there's a significant effect. And it's so significant that Ray Hyman, who was a very devout skeptic, he said that even though that from looking at it, and has a statistician, that he couldn't really see that there was anything wrong with the work, but there had to be something wrong because he knew it couldn't be right. And so he said, so his take on it was that, it was like promissory materialism. Eventually he'll figure out what was wrong. So, because there just has to be something wrong. It can't be psi.
I like that term that you use, promissory materialism, which I believe was a sort of Karl Popper phrase, which is one of those things whenever somebody wants to be really snarky and cites the God of the gaps, well, that exists on the materialist side too. You have materialism of the gaps. By citing God of the gaps, you have materialism of the gaps. Anybody who doesn't know what the God of the gaps philosophy is, it's the idea that just because something is unexplained, rather, people who are into metaphysics suggest that there must be something anomalous for that. But what they don't realize is that's an inversion of what they're saying. Is they're saying that their, for lack of a better term, God, their materialist philosophy, will do the exact same thing that they're accusing people of citing anomalies of. And that was sort of the empty promissory note of materialism. Yeah.
Okay, and I was going to say I have one other study that I think was really well done.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was going to say the Maimonides, I hope I pronounced that correctly, dream studies that were done. Trying to think now. I would have written all this down if you'd warned me, Seriah. But
sorry.
But basically, it was done where they tried to send images to people who were dreaming, and the reason it worked so well was that they would wake up the dreamers at various times, and they would have to describe what they were dreaming at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go back to sleep, then they get sent something, and then they'd wake them up again. And it was just because they were woken up right in the midst of dreaming when you're best able to remember it. And they would write it down, and they had like strikingly high, whereas the Gansfield you're getting, like 33% instead of 25%. In the dream studies, they were getting like 75%.
Wow.
So apparently we may be much more able to tap into that kind of ability when we're asleep.
If that makes total sense.
Yeah. But the reason that those studies weren't done, continued to be done, was it was very expensive for the facilities because it was done kind of in a hospital setting. And it very time consuming because you have to keep waking people up. And whereas something like the Gansfield, which doesn't have a strong effect, but it's much more cost effective and quicker. You can get data points a lot faster. But those two studies, I think, were very good ones.
Okay. All right. Josh?
Well, for me, it's more about just sort of the body and the critical mass of a lot of this stuff. It's not one particular study that's happened in a laboratory. Okay. It's really sort of the yeah. I just think there's a consistency there. I think Dean Radin's double slit experiment that he's sort of worked on is really impressive. I think that for me, on a more personal level, the democratization that psi effects can have on somebody, even though I ironically haven't really delved into it myself. Like, if you really want to not believe in this stuff, or sort of shift your opinion to believe in this stuff, just try it for a while. I'm always amazed by the number of people who haven't tried this stuff who also think that it's completely absurd.
Well, that's why they haven't tried it.
Yeah, but it's but at the same time, I have found very few people who have tried it. I don't say it works the first time. I mean, sometimes it does, but I'm amazed by the number of people who have tried it like 3 times and are like, you know what? It eventually took hold. I had something similar happen with me, in terms of just some sigil work, that the first time it wasn't that good, and then I sort of read up and said, how can I do this better? Second time wasn't that good, read up, said, how can I do this better? And then the third time, tickety-boo, it all just sort of unfolds just as I intended. In which case, I was like, for me personally, I was like, okay, I'm going to put that on the shelf. I'm just going to put that right there, and I'm not going to revisit it myself. But for me, it's just about the sheer amount of research that's out there. I don't think any one study will ever change any minds, but the fact that there is so much evidence, and there is so much, there's so much evidence that's playing by the current rules that the establishment wants you to play by, which I don't think is even necessarily the best set of parameters to evaluate this stuff by. Yet they still are getting results that just are just not being acknowledged. I think that's really, for me, the real impetus for accepting the fact that this has some sort of legitimate objective reality.
Wren?
So I just want to echo what Josh basically just said. I couldn't. I'm not really an academic like you guys. I'm more just a woo lord. And
no, I'm not. I'm not an academic. I just play one on television. You could cite studies. I could go look up a bunch of studies and say, hey, here's the evidence. But that's really not. I mean, some people, it's just not. That's not going to convince people. They're not even going to read the studies, and they're just going to tell you that it was flawed. Like what? I think the way you really get people to understand that it's real and it works is to just do it. Go on YouTube, pull up the Grant Morrison disinfo, talk, listen to it, get all excited, go do some sigil magic, go talk to ghosts, go look for a UFO, go Bigfoot hunting, just get out there and actually do this stuff, and it will find you, and you'll find pretty quickly that the world's a lot weirder than you thought it was. Like you said with the magic thing, beginner's luck, that's a well-documented thing, actually. McMoneagle said they saw that a lot in RV research, where the first time someone would go in and do a remote viewing, they would knock it out of the park, even people who didn't even believe in it. But then it's kind of you become too self-aware, and then they would their results would drop off dramatically. Then slowly they would come back up to better than average. The ego gets in the way. I think that's part of it. It's you start like you said, overthinking it, and
overthinking it for sure. I think overthinking it, and you also start adding on a lot of analytical overlay. That's kind of overthinking it, but more like you start, I guess, expecting the experience to be exactly the same as it was the first time, and you stop taking it on its own merits, which you would probably do if you didn't believe in it at all. Just encourage people to just do it. Go out and do magic, and you'll find out real quick that you can say some words, scribble some lines on a piece of paper, and stare at it, and you can make things happen in the world.
Well, do it with an open mind, and maybe some substance help, I'm not really endorsing that, but the one time that I had it happen, I had some chemical help, and it really seemed to make a huge freaking difference. Because I think it's partially not necessarily because there's any sort of legitimacy to being in, altered states, but also just it took my mind off of
I think it probably relaxed you. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know me. You know me. You know me by now.
I think it relaxed you enough to let yourself do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. Like, you know, if I'm going to do karaoke, I'm a lot better at karaoke if I'm a little sauced first. You know, same thing with magic. Sometimes you're a little better at magic if you, you know, have a little help. But you don't need that. I mean, obviously, I don't really do anything like that anymore, and I do plenty of magic, and I get results.
Yeah.
It was that and Tim Renner's Wilderness Geist album, which really just sort of put me over the edge. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some really good, for people who are unsure about doing this stuff by themselves, there's actually some good like online conferences for people who want to kind of try things out. There's one called the Cyber Dreaming Conference that's held every fall, and it's online. You just you just do all these workshops online, and they have it where they teach you how to teach you how to set intentions in your dreams, and then you do these different workshops where you try and find the target and do different kind of psi things. And because you're just writing down your dreams basically and then reporting on them the next morning, there isn't this pressure to perform, because and it's really interesting that you'll find that people start having the same dreams, or you'll get the target, like they do kind of like a dream remote viewing experiment where you try and dream about what the target's going to be. And it's amazing, like it's really surprising when it works. It's like, wow, you know. And there's no pressure, and because dreaming is something that's not that foreign to us,
right?
That's actually a really good introduction. And I noticed that those sort of dream workshops, the dreamers are really into this whole kind of exploration of different abilities.
That's a really good point, Shirley. I mean, I have not done it, but I've heard great results from people who have kept dream journals.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And who will have those particular, observations pay off months, even years down the line.
Yeah.
I haven't done it because I'm lazy, but I've heard great things. So there's that.
Yeah, no, I have a friend who kept a dream journal for years to prove that precognitive dreams didn't happen, because he'd had one that pretty much saved his life, and he ended up proving to himself that, yep, they do happen.
Yeah, you send me those, Shirley. That was an amazing read. He's like, oops, I accidentally proved myself wrong. And I mean, too, if you just want to do a simple thing to prove to yourself that, like, telepathy or precognition is a thing, if you have it may be on Android too, but I know on iPhone, there's like a ESP app that I think Russell Targ or someone made.
Yes, the ESP trainer.
Yeah, ESP trainer. Yeah, I mean it's basic. It's pretty simple. You just basically just pick one of four squares, and one of four squares will have the right image in it, and it's you do so many of the tests, and then it scores you at the end. And the first time I did it, I was terrible. I bombed at it, and then I remembered something that I'd heard someone suggest. Where I think it comes from Edgar Cayce or something. It's like an affirmation. I'm not really like a Cayce guy, and I felt really silly doing this. But basically, you just look at yourself in the mirror and say, "I am profoundly psychic," and just really believe it. And then I went back and did the test and got like 80% right.
Well, and that's an interesting point, Ron, because I think that this sounds sort of self-fulfilling, but I think there has to be a level of naivete about yourself in proving, in fostering these abilities, in self-belief. And I think it's part of the reason that a lot of people who are debunkers and skeptics don't really experience these things, is because they will never actually go to the extreme of looking in the mirror and saying something like that.
Yeah.
Because it just feels so silly, and because it feels so silly, they just sort of shut themselves off to actually, the possible power that sort of an affirmation might have.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. sometimes when you do magic, you certainly feel like you're LARPing, like, especially if you're into like, the ceremonial type crap I do, where, you dress up in robes and you have a sword and a wand and all this other junk. Sometimes, you're like, man, if I could see myself, I would be extremely embarrassed. But luckily,
Harry Potter must not return to the Twin Cities. Yeah.
Like, luckily, I can't see myself, so I can just imagine that I look like a cool wizard, when in reality I look like, I stumbled out of a Wren fair. But, like, it kind of adds to it. There's like there is an element of like childlike like play that comes with Psi. It's something I was actually talking with somebody about this the other day, because they mentioned like the tricksterish things. That's why you can't really study in a lab, because of the trickster stuff, and how a study of this is very tricksterish. And I actually think that's kind of this is my hot take for the podcast, but I actually think that's kind of a cop-out. I don't think it's tricksterish. I just don't think we understand it well enough. Because I think people like Dean Radin have shown that you can do repeatable, verifiable experiments in the lab. He hasn't like been affected by this trickster that censors the research or whatever. I just also think that a lot of times maybe these research projects and the people involved in them are kind of liminal, or maybe I don't want to say like tricksterish themselves. I don't really know what the right word would be. Not like carny, like carny folk or something. Like, people tend to be on the weirder side. And I think just in general that can cause things like interpersonal conflicts or projects to fall apart, because people can be kind of spacey.
Well, they entertain esoteric ideas, which is the primary shortfalling of the hardcore skeptics, is that they don't even entertain these ideas.
Yeah.
So they just completely shut themselves off to it.
So years ago, before I was doing this show, I have a friend who is very much a materialistic atheist, and we got to, I don't remember where the conversation started, but it ended up with him basically saying there's no evidence for any of this stuff, et cetera, and he's like, well, show me something. So I think I pointed him to the Pear Laboratories at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately did an internet search and found a page debunking, the Pear Laboratories as all being like faked material and all this other stuff. And it was just like, when I looked at that and then did some research on that, I found out nothing that they were saying was actually like backed up by anything. It was just them making these claims. And then I started looking at other parts of the page, and there's like it was like a skeptic's dictionary type of thing. And it had articles on UFOs and stuff, and they were all wrong. And I'm just like, huh. And so I got back to him. I'm like, you do realize nothing on this page has anything backing it. And he just kind of like didn't really respond. It's just like, he had proved his point that nope, the Pear Laboratories weren't real. It was all fake stuff by people there just trying to, fake it. And that was that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you get a type of person sometimes who, for whatever reason, just does not want to accept this stuff, will not even look at facts, even though they may be saying, show me the facts. The minute you show them the facts, they're like, no, those aren't good.
Well, as I mentioned to y'all earlier before we got on, I was at a conference recently, and there was supposed to be a skeptics versus believers panel, which honestly, I probably would have sided more with the skeptics, but there's only one skeptic on the panel, and his stance was, I believe in materialism because we can do things to affect the brain that affects consciousness, which is, I don't even know where to begin with that. but I think that there was an object lesson sort of in the fact that it was scheduled to be like a 10-person panel, and it was 5 believers and 1 skeptic who actually showed up. And it was, these other people had other commitments that they were there at the conference for, and they weren't double booked. They just didn't show up. And I think it's that sort of dismissive attitude. I think there was, like I said, a real object lesson in that, perhaps, for the way that these things are treated. It's this, again, that surety fetish that so many people tend to have that really just...
But I wonder how much of it is fear, not just surety, like fear that they're wrong. You know, what if my worldview is shattered if somebody shows me this information? I'm just going to, like, not even look.
I don't know if it's that. I just think you can never underestimate the willpower of, like, a confident idiot. You know? Someone just...
Slow clap, Wren Collier. Slow clap.
The one of the pieces of evidence I found very interesting came out of Cornell. Now, what was interesting about it is it made mainstream news, but of course it was billed as pornography proves telepathy or something to that degree. And the guy, the professor actually ended up on the Colbert Report talking about it because they were showing, what they were doing is showing random people images and watching their brains, and they'd find that anytime a sexual image was going to appear, like a split second before, their brains would react to it.
That was the Daryl Bim experiment that I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, time traveling porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also says a lot about what we react to, you know, as a species do.
Yeah. So sorry, you can go ahead and sort of finish that scenario if you want to, Seriah.
But that was something that got mainstream, you know, attention. Like, and it didn't get laughed out, and it got replicated, and I think some other places did it and came up with the same results.
Yeah, although the skeptics really went back, like there was a lot of pushback. So they actually came up with an online debunking experiment, and I went through it like the first day and figured out how you could rig it to come up with whatever answer you wanted on the skeptical version. That
really?
They'd made one so that if you'd wanted to, you could get really poor, really good results every single time. And so, but they were claiming that this was to show that the original experiment, which was there was no way to cheat on the original experiment. You could only cheat on the skeptics version.
Well, yeah, because they were measuring brain waves. They were measuring brain waves, so it's not something you could cheat on. And it was consistently showing a spike in certain brain activity when a sexual image was about to appear, but before the image appeared.
Yeah, but that also brings up that interesting psi conundrum where you have to wonder if it's precognition or is it retrocausality.
Right. That's also a possibility.
Because I don't think there's any real way to tell the difference, because there's ultimately not an experiential difference between those two things, other than one of them maybe implies a lack of free will, maybe?
Yeah. Possibly. It's and the thing also about that experiment is they weren't using psychics; they were using regular people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, you know, stands out fairly well because of the way it was peer reviewed and repeated, and the fact that it actually got sort of a national spotlight. Granted, because it had the pornography element to it,
right?
But even someone like Colbert, who seems to be pretty much a materialist atheist type himself, I could be wrong about that, but he's always struck me as that way. Had this guy on to talk about it and took it seriously. Well, serious. He took anything on his show.
Yeah, I mean, you never know though with some people. I mean, like I think Dan Aykroyd was recently on last podcast of the left, like talking about UFO experiences and stuff.
Oh yeah, but he's been involved in this stuff forever.
Yeah,
he's very open about it.
Well, he grew up with family seances, so you know.
Oh yeah, he was a spiritual. His family was like spiritualists, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. I forget about that.
He had a TV show for a bit, didn't he? Dealing with that stuff, like a sightings type of show.
It never made it onto the air, and he.
Oh, okay.
That's the one that he said the Men in Black shut down.
Really, I don't know that story.
It's on the internet somewhere. You can find it if you go to YouTube. It's where he talks about how he had the show, and he had like good guests on that were lined up, and I wish like they've got interviews with John Mack that were never put out there.
Oh, that's
really?
Yeah, you know.
Jeez.
Yeah, and the show was shut down before it aired the first program. There's, I think, little bits of some of the stuff that was done on YouTube, but he gives an interview where he basically blames the Men in Black for shutting down his show.
Yeah, Dan Aykroyd and the Men in Black. There's a documentary that came out in 2005 called Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs.
Yeah, he talks about it there.
I used to play keys for Danicor in the Men in Black, so back when we were playing Coachella,
Not tuba.
yeah. No, not tuba. No, just doing block chords. Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, when you look at some of this and some of the research that's been coming out, it seems like some of the science, online science sites and stuff, like the ones that are a little more, a little better at this stuff, are treating this stuff a little more openly. And also, the whole thing about the whole like Project Stargate. You'll hear people say, well, remote viewing doesn't work. That's why they shut down Project Stargate. But if you listen to the people who worked with Project Stargate, and Cherylee, you probably know this better than I do, they were getting good results, but it got packaged in with other projects that weren't getting good results and got shut down as a consequence.
I think it was a little bit different.
Was it?
Yeah. I think it was... I think they were, and this is what I've heard just from various people, but I think that they were actually shut down because of, this is going to sound weird, but basically elements of the religious right in America, who were kind of, like the prayer warrior types, who were actually taking some of the research. I think David told me about this, like, they were taking some of the research from those programs and applying it to basically Christian fundamentalists, prayer warrior type stuff. And some of those elements were within government at the time and kind of treated the whole subject as not demonic, but they wanted to shut it down because of I guess the occulty connotations of it all.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there were some concerns too that they had already been caught doing other things, with LSD and various other inappropriate activity done by the U.S. government against its citizens, and so anything that seemed fringe or occult, they wanted to just distance themselves from.
Yeah, because that was right around the time that the MK Ultra document or stuff first came out too. Yeah, so that Stargate might have really been shut down as more of a damage control kind of thing, but I don't think it was ever really shut down. I mean, I still think that there is probably clandestine remote viewers employed by the U.S. government. I mean, I have almost no doubts about that. I think most major governments probably use them to some extent. I mean, we know the Russians did. I think McGonigal said the Chinese had remote viewers as well. So, I mean, it just, them knowing that they were able to use them and they were able to get good information. I mean, they were able to tell through remote viewing that the, in Tehran during the hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis.
Yeah.
So, they did RV of the area to try to, to prepare for when I think Carter was going to send in special forces to try to rescue the hostages. And they were able, I think in the RV session, they said they saw something like spider webs between the trees. And what it turned out to be was actually that between the trees, they had strung up tripwires that were set to explosives. And so if they tried to land a helicopter at the compound, it would have tripped those wires and would have blown the helicopter to bits. And the RVers were actually able to warn them about this. Before they did so they they had to find another method of insertion. So I mean, they got great results from it. So they didn't get shut down for lack of results.
Well, now I'm wondering who it was I heard talking about it that said that it was that it got pushed in with other things.
I mean, I think what Cherylee was talking about, it got lumped in with basically anything that was weird, occulty, mind control-y, anything that stunk of that. I think the government was cutting people loose after the MK Ultra stuff came out.
All right. Well, I mean, it's certainly possible. It's just for some reason I want to say it was on Skeptico, someone from the project was on Skeptico, and that's where I heard it. I also may be remembering it wrong too.
Well, so part of what I said about the religious stuff, people like McMonigal and Ed May and stuff, they don't come out and say it as explicitly as I said it. I'm basing my theory there just on kind of like reading between the lines of things they've said in books and interviews. And kind of I kind of tie it in with the Collins Elite stuff from Nick Redfern's Final Events. Like, I think the Collins Elite was kind of part of that same group that ended up getting Stargate shut down. Because specifically, I think McMonagle said one of the big guys who was like instrumental in getting Stargate shut down was like a Navy admiral. I don't think he ever said his name. But I think that a similar person was also involved in the Collins Elite. I'd have to double check on that, but at least in my mind, in my head canon, that's how it works.
All right. Okay. So I guess last thoughts on all this.
I don't know.
Or go ahead,
sorry.
Oh, go
I was going to say, if anyone is looking for like a really fun, let's try out experiments thing, Ions has a page called Got Sci, and it's got a bunch of like different little like there's a quick remote viewing test and card draw test. They're fun little experiment ones that you can try. And yeah, I know it's just for fun, but it's like doing that trainer thing. And if you don't have an iPhone, you can go online and find it, and it's easy. Just look under Got Sci.
And I think personal experience is definitely the most convincing thing anyone's going to ever deal with. Is when you have that incident of personal experience that you just can't get around. And
yeah, except that people can deny them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I know I even said that a few minutes ago, but now thinking about it, like my girlfriend had some precognitive dreams a few months ago, but now she makes fun of me for the magic stuff. For like a month there, she was like, "Yeah, I believe in it," but then now she's back to like, "Yeah, this is all bullcrap, and you're silly for doing it." So yeah, even sometimes personal experience isn't going to convince some people.
But it's more convincing than facts for a lot of people. It depends how. As long as they're not absolute deniers of it.
Yeah, I think it's more convincing than reading a bunch of research papers, which, is great if you're into research and you can, you understand what the papers are actually saying and you can read them closely. But what's really going to open your eyes is to experience it yourself.
I had an old co-host on my radio show, and I know I told this story at some point. There was one friend of mine, and it's only happened with her, but I could pick up what she was thinking. Like every once in a while, a thought of hers would just pop in my head. No idea why, but that's what would happen, and it's never happened with anyone else. And so my friend was pretty much a skeptic on all this, my co-host, and he's sitting there, and she looks up when we're at the radio station. She goes, and I just respond to her because I heard in my head what she was going to ask me. I'd hear it in her voice. And so I respond to her, and she goes, all right. And he goes, yeah, he knew that because he's psychic. And she goes, I know, he does it to me all the time. And then after a few moments, he started thinking about it, and he's like, wait, how did you know what she was going to ask? And I think that kind of put a seed of doubt in him. And a little bit later, he was told he was going to be moving for a job because he was a postgrad at Cornell. And he told me this, and I said, no, you're not leaving. Because it was just there. Like, I knew he wasn't leaving, and I told him this, and he got actually pretty upset with me after a while because he didn't actually want to leave. And it came down to the week before he was supposed to leave, and I kept saying, you're not going anywhere. And he walked into the studio one night and goes, how the F did you know? And I looked at him and I went, no what? He's like, I'm not leaving. I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, I told you that. And that kind of just broke him. He's like, all right, this stuff happens,
Yeah, that'll definitely convince you.
So even though he didn't have that experience, it was being around me and not being able to explain that and not being too honest with himself to just like deny it.
Yeah, and then it's like a little oyster that little bit of experience becomes a grain of sand that will continue to irritate someone until it turns into a nice little pearl of truth when they realize that psi exists.
Josh, anything you want to add?
Nope, just read. just. I know that I got called out on the failures of the ETH episode for just saying look into the research, but I just feel like if you actually commit yourself to reading about this stuff, you will find that there is no shortage of strong evidence supporting the reality of psi phenomena. And if you actually do the next step, which is, I mean, not even magic, but like the power of positive thinking, which sounds really lame, but there's something to it. And looking for synchronicities in your life, you'll find that this is a reality too. Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank all of you. This has been a good conversation. And I'm sure we'll continue with this at some point as well. So, yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I do want to say that the whole conversation kind of caught Wren and Cherylee off guard. We were originally going to do a show with listener stories. And since Josh was available, I kind of wanted to do this. And I figured they were up to snuff with it, especially Cherylee. But Cherylee was a little upset because she didn't feel like she was totally prepared. I still maintain that Cherylee is way more prepared than on the spot than I'll be with lots of study because she knows this stuff inside and out. But if she got anything wrong, that's why. She had no idea this is the show we were going to be doing this night, and neither did Wren, who didn't say that much because of that. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure we'll do a follow-up at some point on this, on the evidence for psi. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.